Hey, how you doing? It's Alex here from Time Studio. Right, so the name of this video today is it the end? And do creative technicians need to evolve? And when I say creative technician, I'm kind of referring more to people within, the creative world who are kind of focused on a specific type of job. So for example, like a videographer or a video editor, or someone who does like, 3D and animation, and one of the sub sections of that, such as like rigging or shading, or someone who does like sound design, someone who does composition, a specific type of style of composition, etc, etc, etc. I could go on. Now also, why I've been thinking about this is because I read a little book a while ago, and it really opened my mind to the possibilities of what a creative person can do. And obviously we're very inclined to want to kind of hone in on one little thing and just become amazing at it. And I think for anyone who's been doing this for quite a while, or doing something very specific for quite a while, you could probably agree with me that there comes a time where you start to think like, either this area is very saturated, or I need to kind of diversify in order to kind of survive, And I think with things like AI, with the emergence of AI, and a lot of these kind of jobs becoming, more and more redundant, it makes one wonder, do I need to kind of now move on to greener pastures? Do I need to expand beyond this kind of specific role or specific roles, and do I need to become more of someone who's kind of like the overall architect, if that makes sense? One book I read which kind of, got me into this mindset a little bit was it's The E-Myth Revisited by Michael E. Gerber, I'm not sure. But anyway, in this book it talks about every person kind of consists of 3 different little roles within them, such as the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur. And obviously the technician is the person who's very invested in executing a particular task very well. And then the manager obviously manages these types of people. And then the entrepreneur is the person who's kind of got the longer vision, the grand plan. And again, I think with things like AI kind of becoming more prominent and becoming more of a threat to people, maybe now's the time to expand one's horizons and become more entrepreneurial, right? And I know everyone's like an entrepreneur now, but let me explore this a little bit more. So yeah, I think kind of going forward, there is still a place, for people who are very specialized and who are incredible at what they do. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. But I suppose if you're like me, perhaps you're just a more generally creative person who's maybe very good at like maybe 1 or 2 things and then has a general interest in other things, maybe now is the time to kind of contemplate, how can I put my general interests under one umbrella, and how can I utilize that to my greatest advantage? Because I do think like AI is not going to take over everything completely, or yet. There's, again, people who are like the top 10% of their fields who probably will continue to survive. I mean, obviously they'll have to keep on kind of evolving themselves as well, but I think there's always going to be a place for people who are like, exceptionally good at what they do in a small area. But again, if you're like me, you can become very good at a couple of things, but you just generally, your very nature of being a very curious person who's kind of open to all sorts of different things, who I dare say has a bit of shiny object syndrome, you may be pulled to different things, and over time this might disallow you from specializing too much in one thing. And don't get me wrong, I've been that person who at one point I was dead set on music production and being just a composer. And I went through certain challenges where after a while I just started to think, is this really the right path, especially with the rise of AI and just extreme competition, and the fact that you got like game developers who are just using music made by AI. I mean, just things like that's a little bit off-putting. But that's not to say there's a stage in your life where it's valid to try and maybe make your mark in that world. I mean, I think that's maybe for like the younger kind of like people who are maybe like in their 20s, potentially early 30s. But now I'm kind of pushing my late 30s and I've got a kid. I've realized being a technician and just trying to break into a field where you're just doing that one little specific thing is just not really viable for me anymore, And I think as time goes on, you grow. And even when you'll maybe have some sort of success in a small field, a small technical field, you just start to get bored after a while. And I think this is all a part of growth. Growth happens, and you're gonna kind of look at your situation and think like, do I really want to be doing this specific thing for the next 10 years, the next 20 years? And I just think it's just inevitable. At some point, you are gonna want to get out of that situation and perhaps do something a bit more broad, or something where others are kind of, working for you. So I just think it's valid that at some point in your life, you're gonna want to do something very specific, but as time goes on, it does get a little bit kind of boring. And not to mention as well, especially in the technical, in the creative world, you could be doing something very specific, and then you've got the younger generation who are nipping at your heels. You've got things like AI. It really is something which is just worth considering. Like, do I really want to do this, just for the rest of my life, or do I need to evolve, Now, the question is, to become more like business orientated and more entrepreneurial, is it really for everyone? And perhaps not, perhaps not. But one thing I've realized, as creative people, we tend to have a very curious mind, and we want to kind of know the answer for everything, Well, at least I do. I'm always very curious as to what the answer is for a lot of things and how things work and whatnot. But one thing I've noticed as well, I think as creative people, naturally, we work through our senses. We see, we hear, and we can kind of fall for the old, as they call it, shiny object syndrome. For example, you might see someone who's kind of, living their purpose and creating great things, and you think, wow, I want to do that now, and you only see it for like a couple minutes. And, seeing things like that might kind of end up changing the course of your life for like months. That's the old shiny object syndrome. And without going into too much of a tangent about how to avoid that and whatnot, that made me think that stuff like being good at business and quote unquote entrepreneurialism, I think, as creative people, we do have a kind of innate ability to do these things. The very nature of us being creative and having to find a way to make a living out of what we do, that in itself kind of activates that entrepreneurial gene within us. But I think the reason why some of us might kind of put it to the side, or think, oh, that's not really for me, is because essentially it can be a little bit nebulous and a little bit abstract. Whereas if you're seeing like cool video and hearing cool music and you're seeing cool animations, you might get that shiny object syndrome because it is just so sensorial. It's in your face. You're like, okay. But with stuff like, the business and the entrepreneurial stuff, because it's kind of abstract and nebulous, it's kind of harder to think, yeah, that's something I could do. Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit harder for it to kind of pique your natural creative curiosity, because it's not in your face in a physical way. Do you know what I mean? But one thing I realized as the years go by, I think for me to kind of evolve and hopefully survive as a creative person, I really need to embrace that side of me. So yeah, So yeah, I think as creative people and people who might have come up, as kind of technicians, obviously it's important, not to get super identified with your role, because, with technology and changes going on, that role might not be around for much longer. And that can be very painful when your identity is no longer in sync with something which is actually kind of relevant, So I think as time goes on, at least for me, I know I need to kind of evolve, and I know I need to say, well, I love all these individual different kind of skills like editing, like videography, sound design, music, but I need to find a way to create something which encompasses them all without me getting super attached to one discipline. I need to become entrepreneurial, I need to become business minded, and I think that's the missing key. And I don't think it has to be boring. I think, as curious people, as creative people, whatever we do, we're going to apply our creativity to whatever direction we go. It's within the very fabric of our DNA, and I think that's the way forward, at least for me. And, maybe if you resonate with this video, maybe it's for you, who knows? But yeah, let me know what you think. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. I don't have all the answers, you know, I'm just kind of, you know, feeling as I go along. And the question is, are the arts just gonna die and we're all just kind of entrepreneurs and all these types of things? I'm not sure. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think probably it's gonna be a hard time for people who are like, you know, the millennials, kind of people who are in their 30s and whatnot, and, you know, late 30s. And because we've grown up in an environment where we were so accustomed to how things were, you know, and I think with the way the technology is evolving, the way like society is evolving and whatnot, it can be difficult to make those changes. Whereas I think with the younger generation, you know, the quote unquote Gen Z and all that, they're growing up with this technology, and for them, it's just completely normal. So I think they're going to make it work for them, you know, for their artistic sensibilities and whatnot. They're going to make the technology work for them, and they're going to come up with some crazy new things, you know, some real crazy, you know, innovations and whatnot within that kind of, within the artistic side of things and within the quote unquote technician side of things. So I don't think we're just all going to end up just being like entrepreneurs and whatnot. Not at all. But I think, you know, maybe for people who are kind of a bit older, it's now time for us maybe to rise up a little bit and say, you know what, I'm gonna try and collaborate with those who really truly understand how to use the new technology in a really cool and innovative way. And I need to collaborate with them and actually maybe create some sort of business where I can utilize their skills to kind of help my thing grow. You know, so it's like a little exchange. But yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, I would love to, I don't know, in theory, yeah, sure, I'd love to just be, you know, a technician for the rest of my life and just, you know, focus on one little thing. And, you know, I mean, I had dreams of just, you know, doing music production and composition, you know, like just say, yeah, I'm gonna just go hard at this and just do this for the rest of my life and whatnot. And this is all I'm gonna do, and just, you know, just know it through and through. And although I always had a kind of interest in other things, and in a way I thought, is that really what I want? But then you couple that with the fact that, you know, you're competing against the globe now. And it's just, I know some people will say, listen, don't worry about it. You know, you create your reality and you just give it your 120% and you can make it work for you. And, you know, maybe you can, but I think as a creative person, once your identity grows, it's kind of like, you know, the toothpaste coming out the tube, you can't really put it back in. I think once you kind of have grown as a person and you know your creative possibilities, it's hard just to go back to that old identity of saying, I'm just gonna do this one thing. You know what I mean? So yeah, this is just my thoughts. Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I making any sense? Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Yeah, so that's Alex from Tyler Studio. I will see you soon and speak to you soon. Cheers.